Chapter 1. Should we play it safe and do what we're told if we want to succeed? Does playing by the rules pay off? Insight from valedictorians, people who feel no pain, and piano prodigies. Ashlyn Blocker does not feel pain. In fact, she has never felt pain. To the naked eye she is a normal teenage girl, but due to a defect in the SEN9A gene, her nerves did not form the same way yours or mine did. Pain signals do not reach her brain. Sound like a godsend? Hold on. The Wikipedia entry on congenital insensitivity to pain puts it quite simply, it is an extremely dangerous condition. Dane Inouye writes, most children dream about being a superhero when they are young. SIBO patients can be considered Superman because they don't feel physical pain, but it is ironic that what gives them their superpowers also becomes their kryptonite. As recounted in a New York Times Magazine article by Justin Heckeren, Ashlyn's parents noticed she had broken her ankle before she did, and that was 2 days after it occurred. Karen Kan, another woman with the disorder, broke her pelvis giving birth to her first child, but didn't realize it for weeks until the stiffness in her hip made it almost impossible to walk. People with the disorder tend to have shorter lives, often dying during childhood. Of babies with SIBO, congenital insensitivity to pain with anhidrosis, 50% do not live past age 3. Swaddled by well-meaning parents, they do not cry out when they overheat. Those who do survive frequently bite off the tips of their tongue or cause serious damage to their corneas, rubbing their eyes raw. Adults with the disorder are usually covered in scars and have repeatedly broken bones. Every day they must check their bodies for signs of damage. Seeing a bruise, cut, or burn may be the only way they know it has occurred. Appendicitis and other internal maladies are a particular concern. People with SIBO often feel no symptoms until the problem kills them. But how many of us, at one time or another, have not wished we were like Ashlyn? It's easy to naively see only the benefits of such a condition. No more nagging injuries. No fear at the dentist's office. A life free from the minor discomforts of illness and injury. Never another headache or the limitations of capricious lower back pain. In terms of healthcare and lost productivity, pain costs the United States between $560 and $635 billion annually. 15% of Americans face chronic pain daily, and there's little doubt many of them would happily trade places with Ashlyn. One of the villains in the best-selling novel The Girl Who Played with Fire has SIBO, and the disorder is presented as a superpower. With the skills of a professional boxer and unable to feel pain, he is a seemingly unstoppable force and a terrifying foe. This raises larger questions. When are our weaknesses actually strengths? Is it better to be an outlier with both handicaps and superpowers? Or do we live better lives at the middle of the bell curve? We're generally encouraged to play it safe, but is doing the normally prescribed right thing, and not risking the ups and downs of extremes, the path to success, or to mediocrity? To solve this puzzle, let's first look at those who follow the rules and do everything right. What becomes of high school valedictorians? It's what every parent wishes their teenager to be. Mom says study hard and you'll do well. And very often mom is right. But not always. Asterisk. Karen Arnold, a researcher at Boston College, followed 81 high school valedictorians and salutatorians from graduation onward to see what becomes of those who lead the academic pack. Of the 95% who went on to graduate college, their average GPA was 3.6, and by 1994, 60% had received a graduate degree. There was little debate that high school success predicted college success. Nearly 90% are now in professional careers, with 40% in the highest tier jobs. They are reliable, consistent, and well-adjusted, and by all measures the majority have good lives. But how many of these number one high school performers go on to change the world, run the world, or impress the world? The answer seems to be clear, 0. Commenting on the success trajectories of her subjects, Karen Arnold said, even though most are strong occupational achievers, the great majority of former high school valedictorians do not appear headed for the very top of adult achievement arenas. In another interview, Arnold said, valedictorians aren't likely to be the future's visionaries, they typically settle into the system instead of shaking it up. Was it just that these 81 didn't happen to reach the stratosphere? No. Research shows that what makes students likely to be impressive in the classroom is the same thing that makes them less likely to be home run hitters outside the classroom. So why are the number ones in high school so rarely the number ones in real life? There are 2 reasons. First, schools reward students who consistently do what they are told. Academic grades correlate only loosely with intelligence. Standardized tests are better at measuring IQ. Grades are, however, an excellent predictor of self-discipline, conscientiousness, and the ability to comply with rules. In an interview, Arnold said, essentially, we are rewarding conformity and the willingness to go along with the system. Many of the valedictorians admitted to not being the smartest kid in class, just the hardest worker. Others said that it was more an issue of giving teachers what they wanted than actually knowing the material better. Most of the subjects in the study were classified as careerists. They saw their job as getting good grades, not really as learning. The second reason is that schools reward being a generalist. There is little recognition of student passion or expertise. The real world, however, does the reverse. Arnold, talking about the valedictorians, said, they are extremely well-rounded and successful, personally and professionally, but they've never been devoted to a single area in which they put all their passion. That is not usually a recipe for eminence. If you want to do well in school and you're passionate about math, you need to stop working on it to make sure you get an A in history too. This generalist approach doesn't lead to expertise. Yet eventually we almost all go on to careers in which one skill is highly rewarded and other skills aren't that important. Ironically, Arnold found that intellectual students who enjoy learning struggle in high school. They have passions they want to focus on, are more interested in achieving mastery, and find the structure of school stifling. Meanwhile, the valedictorians are intensely pragmatic. They follow the rules and prize A's over skills and deep understanding. School has clear rules. Life often doesn't. When there's no clear path to follow, academic high achievers break down. Sean Akers' research at Harvard shows that college grades aren't any more predictive of subsequent life success than rolling dice. A study of over 700 American millionaires showed their average college GPA was 2.9. Following the rules doesn't create success, it just eliminates extremes, both good and bad. While this is usually good and all but eliminates downside risk, it also frequently eliminates earth-shaking accomplishments. It's like putting a governor on your engine that stops the car from going over 55. You're far less likely to get into a lethal crash, but you won't be setting any land speed records either. So if those who play by the rules don't end up at the very top, who does? Asterisk. Winston Churchill should have never been Prime Minister of Great Britain. He wasn't someone who did everything right, and it was shocking that he was elected. His contemporaries knew he was brilliant, but he was also a paranoid loose cannon who was impossible to deal with. Initially rising up through the ranks of British politics at a steady clip, he was elected to Parliament at age 26. Churchill was eventually found lacking and deemed unsuitable for the highest offices. By the 1930s his career was effectively over. In many ways he was a perfect foil to Neville Chamberlain, a leader who had done everything right and was the prototypical British Prime Minister. Britain does not choose its leaders carelessly. A review of Prime Ministers shows they are generally older and more strongly vetted than their American counterparts. John Major rose to power more quickly than almost any British leader, but was still objectively more prepared for the role than the majority of US presidents. Churchill was a maverick. He did not merely love his country, he displayed a clear paranoia toward any possible threat to the empire. He saw even Gandhi as a danger and was beyond outspoken in his opposition to what was a pacifist rebellion in India. He was the Chicken Little of Great Britain, passionately railing against all opposition to his country, great, small, or imagined. But this bad quality is the key to why he is one of the most revered leaders in world history. This Chicken Little was the only one who saw Hitler for the threat he was. Chamberlain, on the other hand, regarded Hitler as a man who could be relied upon when he had given his word. The entrenched British leadership was convinced appeasement was the way to quell the Nazis. When it mattered the most, Churchill's paranoia was prescient. He didn't believe the schoolyard bully would leave them alone if they gave him their lunch money. He knew they needed to sock him in the nose. Churchill's zealotry, the thing that had nearly ruined his career early on, was exactly what Britain needed heading into World War II. And thankfully the British people realized this before it was too late. To answer the big question of who makes it to the top, let's come at it from another angle. What makes a great leader? For years, academic research didn't seem able to make up its mind whether leaders even mattered. Some studies showed that great teams succeeded with or without a figurehead taking the credit. Others showed that sometimes a charismatic individual was the most important factor in whether a group succeeded or failed. It wasn't clear at all, until one academic had a hunch. Gautam Mukunda speculated that the reason for the inconsistency in the research was there are actually two fundamentally different types of leaders. The first kind rises up through formal channels, getting promoted, playing by the rules, and meeting expectations. These leaders, like Neville Chamberlain, are filtered. The second kind doesn't rise up through the ranks, they come in through the window, entrepreneurs who don't wait for someone to promote them, U.S. Vice presidents who are unexpectedly handed the presidency, leaders who benefit from a perfect storm of unlikely events, like the kind that got Abraham Lincoln elected. This group is unfiltered. By the time filtered candidates are in the running for the top spot, they have been so thoroughly vetted that they can be relied upon to make the standard, traditionally approved decisions. They are effectively indistinguishable from one another, and this is why much of the research showed little effect for leaders. But the unfiltered candidates have not been vetted by the system and cannot be relied upon to make the approved decisions. Many would not even know what the approved decisions are. They do unexpected things, have different backgrounds, and are often new and predictable. Yet they bring change and make a difference. Often that difference is a negative. Since they don't play by the rules, they often break the institutions they are guiding. A minority of unfiltered leaders are transformative, though, shedding organizations of their misguided beliefs and foolish consistencies, and turning them toward better horizons. These are the leaders that the research said have enormous positive impact. In his PhD thesis, Mukunda applied his theory to all the US presidents, evaluating which ones were filtered and which unfiltered, and whether or not they were great leaders. The results were overwhelming. His theory predicted presidential impact with an almost unheard of statistical confidence of 99%. The filtered leaders didn't rock the boat. The unfiltered leaders couldn't help but rock it. Often they broke things, but sometimes they broke things like slavery, as Abraham Lincoln did. Mukunda understood firsthand. His unconventional PhD thesis made him an outlier in the academic job market. Despite a Harvard and MIT pedigree, he received only 2 job interviews after more than 50 applications. Schools wanted a conventional professor who could teach political science 101, they wanted a filtered academic. Mukunda's outside-the-box approach made him an unlikely candidate for traditional professorships. Only schools looking for superstar outliers, with the resources to support a diverse and well-rounded faculty, were interested in someone like him. Harvard Business School made him an offer, and he accepted. When I spoke to Mukunda, he said, the difference between good leaders and great leaders is not an issue of more. They are fundamentally different people. Had the British seen the failure of appeasement and said, get us a better Neville Chamberlain, they would have been screwed. They didn't need a more filtered leader, they needed someone the system would have never let in the door. The old ways didn't work, and doubling down on them would have been disastrous. To fight a menace like Hitler, they needed a maverick like Churchill. When I asked Mukunda what made the unfiltered leaders so much more impactful, he said often they had unique qualities that differentiated them. Not the flattering descriptors you might expect, like incredibly smart or politically astute. These qualities were often negative at the mean, qualities you and I would consider bad, but due to the specific context, they became positives. Like Churchill's paranoid defense of the British state, these qualities were a poison that under just the right circumstances could be a performance-enhancing drug. Mukunda calls these intensifiers. And they hold the secret to how your biggest weakness might just be your greatest strength. Asterisk. Glenn Gould was such a hypochondriac that if you sneezed while on a phone call with him, he'd immediately hang up. The classical pianist routinely wore gloves, and it wasn't uncommon for him to have on multiple pairs at the same time. Speaking about the portable pharmacy of medications he always had on him, Gould said, one reporter wrote that I traveled with a suitcase full of pills. Actually, they barely fill a briefcase. He'd cancel as many as 30% of his concerts, sometimes rebooking them and then recancelling them. Gould quipped, I don't go to concerts, sometimes not even my own. Yeah, he was a strange guy. He's also one of the undisputed greatest musicians of the 20th century. He won 4 Grammys and sold millions of albums. He even achieved the truest hallmark of fame in our era, he was referenced on an episode of The Simpsons. Gould wasn't merely a hypochondriac. He was called a musical Howard Hughes by Newsweek. He would go to sleep at 6 a.m. and wake in the afternoon. If he deemed a flight unlucky, he'd refuse to get on the plane. He hated cold weather so much he wore winter clothes in the summer and often used a trash bag to carry his everyday items. This eventually led to Gould being arrested in Florida because police mistook him for a hobo. Of course, his eccentricities affected his relationships. Afraid that getting too close to people might hurt his work, he often kept friends at arm's length. His lifeline was the telephone. In the last 9 months of his life, he ran up a phone bill approaching $13,000. His crazy driving earned the passenger seat of his car the nickname the suicide seat among his friends. He once commented, "I suppose it can be said that I'm an absent-minded driver. It's true that I've driven through a number of red lights on occasion, but on the other hand, I've stopped at a lot of green ones but never gotten credit for it." What was even stranger was how he played his famous music. Kevin Bazana described it in his wonderful biography of Gould: the rumpled appearance, the simian crouch over the keyboard, the flailing arms and gyrating torso and bobbing head. Remember, this isn't a jazz pianist or Elton John. This guy was playing Bach. And he hated performing. His control-freak nature did not lend itself to the touring requirements of changing planes and hotels and dealing with new people daily. "I detest audiences. I think they are a force of evil," he once hissed. And then there was the chair. Because of his playing style, Gould needed a special chair. It was a little more than a foot off the ground and sloped forward so he could comfortably sit on the edge of the seat. He had so many specific requirements that his father ended up having to custom make it for him. Gould would use that one chair for his entire career, shipping it everywhere for his performances. It underwent significant wear and tear over the years, eventually being held together by wire and tape. It can even be heard squeaking on his albums. Despite his extreme eccentricity, he was electrifying. As George Sell of the Cleveland Orchestra once said, "That nut's a genius." But his skills, his fame, his success, all could have easily never come to be. Yes, he was a prodigy, having achieved the skill level of a professional at age 12, but he was so awkward and sensitive as a child that for a few years he had to be homeschooled because he couldn't deal with the pressures of being around other kids. Gould could have been someone completely unable to function in the real world. So how did he manage to thrive and become one of the greats? Luckily, he was born into an environment perfectly suited to his fragile temperament. His parents were supportive, to an almost impossible degree. His mother devoted herself to nurturing his talent and his father spent $3,000 a year on Glenn's musical training. Does $3,000 not sound like a lot? This was in the 1940s. That was twice the average annual salary in Toronto at the time, Gould's hometown. With such an incredible level of support and an inexhaustible work ethic, Gould's talent bloomed. He would be known for 16-hour days and 100-hour weeks in the recording studio. It wasn't odd for him to be oblivious to the calendar when scheduling sessions and to require a reminder that most people did not want to work on Thanksgiving or Christmas. When asked what advice he would give aspiring artists, he said, "You must give up everything else." His neuroses-fueled obsessiveness paid off. By the young age of 25, he was performing on a musical tour of Russia. No North American had done that since before World War II. At 28, he was on television with Leonard Bernstein and the New York Philharmonic. By 31, he was a legend of music. Then he decided to vanish. "I really would like the last half of my life to myself," Gould said. At 32, he stopped performing publicly altogether. All told, he had given fewer than 300 concerts. Most touring musicians do that in just 3 years. He still worked like a madman, but he no longer performed for audiences. He wanted the control that only studio recording could give him. Oddly enough, his retirement from performance did not limit his influence in the world of music. In fact, it enhanced it. Kevin Bazana notes, Gould went on maintaining his presence through a conspicuous absence. He kept working until his death in 1982. The next year he was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. What did Gould have to say about his extreme habits and crazy lifestyle? "I don't think I'm all that eccentric." Biographer Kevin Bazana says, "That is a hallmark of a true eccentric, not thinking you're all that eccentric, even when your every thought, word, and deed seems to set you apart from the rest of the world." Gould certainly would not have become a musical legend without that early encouragement and incredible financial support from his parents. He was too fragile and peculiar a creature to withstand the harshness of the world. Without that nurturing he might really have been just an overdressed hobo in Florida. Let's talk about orchids, dandelions, and hopeful monsters. I know, you talk about these things all the time and this is nothing new to you. Please indulge me. There's an old Swedish expression that says most kids are dandelions but a few are orchids. Dandelions are resilient. They're not the most beautiful flowers, but even without good care they thrive. Nobody goes around deliberately planting dandelions. You don't need to. They do just fine under almost any conditions. Orchids are different. If you don't care for them properly they wilt and die. But if given proper care, they bloom into the most gorgeous flowers imaginable. Now we're not just talking about flowers, and we're not just talking about kids. We're actually learning a lesson about cutting-edge genetics. The news is always reporting on a gene that causes this or that. Our first instinct is to label the gene as bad or good. This gene causes alcoholism or violence. Phew, good thing I don't have that gene. It's just bad. Psychologists call this the diathesis stress model. If you have this bad gene and encounter problems in life, you're predisposed to end up with a disorder like depression or anxiety, so pray you don't have the awful gene that can turn you into a monster. There's only one problem, more and more it's looking like this perspective might be wrong. Recent discoveries in genetics are turning this bad gene versus good gene model on its head and pointing toward what looks a lot more like the concept of intensifiers. Psychologists call it the differential susceptibility hypothesis. The same genes that lead to bad stuff can actually lead to great stuff in a different situation. The same knife that can be used to viciously stab someone can also prepare food for your family. Whether the knife is good or bad depends on context. Let's get specific. Most people have a normal DRD4 gene, but some have a variant called DRD4-7R. Oh. 7R has been associated with ADHD, alcoholism, and violence. It's a bad gene. Yet researcher Ariel Nafo did a study to see which kids would share candy without being asked. Most 3-year-olds are not about to give up tasty treats if they don't have to, but the kids who had the 7R gene were more likely to. Why were the kids with this bad gene so inclined to help, even when they weren't asked? Because 7R isn't bad. Like that knife, it's reliant on context. 7R kids who were raised in rough environments, who were abused or neglected, were more likely to become alcoholics and bullies. But 7R children who received good parenting were even kinder than kids who had the standard DRD4 gene. Context made the difference. A number of other genes associated with behavior have shown similar effects. Teenagers with one type of the CHIM2 gene who are raised poorly end up as the worst delinquents, but teens with the same gene, raised in good homes, come out on top. Children who have a 5-HTTLPR variant and domineering parents are more likely to cheat, while kids with the same gene who receive kind nurturing are the types most likely to obey the rules. Okay, let's step away from the microscope and the acronyms for a sec. Most people are dandelions, they'll come out okay under almost any circumstances. Others are orchids, they are not just more sensitive to negative outcomes but more sensitive to everything. They won't flourish in the dirt by the side of a road like a dandelion would. But when they are well tended in a nice greenhouse, their beauty will put the dandelions to shame. As writer David Dobbs said in a piece for The Atlantic, the very genes that give us the most trouble as a species, causing behaviors that are self-destructive and antisocial, also underlie humankind's phenomenal adaptability and evolutionary success. With a bad environment and poor parenting, orchid children can end up depressed, drug-addicted, or in jail, but with the right environment and good parenting, they can grow up to be society's most creative, successful, and happy people. This leads us to hopeful monsters. What are they? Professors Wendy Johnson and Thomas J. Bouchard, Jr. said, a hopeful monster is an individual that deviates radically from the norm in a population because of a genetic mutation that confers a potentially adaptive advantage. While Darwin said that all evolution was gradual, Richard Goldschmidt put forth the idea that maybe nature occasionally made bigger changes. And he was mocked as a kook. But late in the 20th century, scientists like Stephen Jay Gould started realizing Goldschmidt may have been onto something. Researchers started seeing examples of mutations that weren't so gradual and fit the hopeful monsters theory. Nature occasionally tries something very different, and if that monster finds the right environment and succeeds, it might just end up changing the species for the better. Again, it's the intensifiers theory. As writer Poe Bronson said, all of Silicon Valley is based on character defects that are rewarded uniquely in this system. What if I told you your son's upper body would be too long, his legs too short, his hands and feet too big, and he'd have gangly arms? I doubt you'd jump for joy. None of those things sounds objectively good. But when a knowledgeable swim coach hears those things, he sees nothing but Olympic gold. Michael Phelps should be considered one of the X-Men, a mutant with superpowers. Is Phelps physically perfect? Far from it. He doesn't dance well. Or even run well. In fact, he doesn't seem designed to move on land at all. But Mark Levine and Michael Sokolov both wrote pieces for the New York Times describing Phelps' collection of odd traits as making him uniquely suited to being an awesome swimmer. Yes, he's strong and lean, but for a 6'4" man he's not normally proportioned. His legs are short and his trunk long, making him more like a canoe. He has disproportionately big hands and feet, better flippers. If you extend your arms out in either direction, the distance between your fingertips should match your height. Not for Phelps. His wingspan is 6 feet 7 inches. Longer arms mean more powerful strokes in the pool. Phelps joined the US Olympic team at age 15. Nobody so young had done that since 1932. His biggest challenge as a swimmer? Diving into the pool. He's slower off the blocks than most swimmers. Phelps simply wasn't built for moving out of water. And this monster is more than just hopeful, he's earned more Olympic medals than anyone, ever. How does this relate to success outside of athletics? Researchers Wendy Johnson and Thomas J. Bouchard Jr. suggest that geniuses might be considered hopeful monsters too. While Michael Phelps can be awkward on terra firma, Glenn Gould seemed positively hopeless in polite society. But both of them thrived, thanks to the right environment. We saw that some orchids wilt from bad parenting and blossom when raised well. Why else might some monsters end up hopeless and others hopeful? Why do some people end up crazy brilliant and others end up crazy crazy? Dean Keith Simonton says that when creative geniuses take personality tests, their scores on the pathology scales fall in a middle range. Creators exhibit more psychopathology than average persons, but less than true psychotics. They seem to possess just the right amount of weirdness. Too often we label things good or bad when the right designation might merely be different. The Israeli military needed people who could analyze satellite images for threats. They needed soldiers who had amazing visual skills, wouldn't get bored looking at the same place all day long, and could notice subtle changes. Not an easy task. But the IDF's Visual Intelligence Division found the perfect recruits in the most unlikely of places. They began recruiting people with autism. While autistics may struggle with personal interaction, many excel at visual tasks, like puzzles. And they've proven themselves a great asset in their nation's defense. Dr. David Weeks, a clinical neuropsychologist, wrote, "Eccentrics are the mutations of social evolution, providing the intellectual materials for natural selection. They can be orchids like Glenn Gould or hopeful monsters like Michael Phelps. We spend too much time trying to be good when good is often merely average. To be great we must be different. And that doesn't come from trying to follow society's vision of what is best, because society doesn't always know what it needs. More often being the best means just being the best version of you. As John Stuart Mill remarked, that so few now dare to be eccentric, marks the chief danger of our time. In the right environment, bad can be good and odd can be beautiful." Asterisk. Steve Jobs was worried. In 2000, he and the other senior leaders of Pixar were all asking the same question, was Pixar losing its edge? They'd had huge hits in Toy Story 2, and A Bug's Life, but they feared that with success the studio synonymous with creativity would grow, slow down, and become complacent. To try to invigorate the team, they hired Brad Bird, director of the acclaimed animated film Iron Giant, to helm Pixar's next big project. Jobs, John Lasseter, and Ed Catmull felt he had the mind to keep the company vibrant. Did he address the creativity crisis by leaning on Pixar's established top performers? No. Did he recruit top outside talent and bring in new blood? Nope. This wasn't the time to play it safe and look for filtered talent. It had made them successful, but it had also gotten them to this sticking point. As he assembled his first project at Pixar, Bird revealed his plan to address the creativity crisis. Give us the black sheep. I want artists who are frustrated. I want the ones who have another way of doing things that nobody's listening to. Give us all the guys who are probably headed out the door. Translation, give me your unfiltered artists. I know they are crazy. That's exactly what I need. Bird's new Dirty Dozen of animation didn't just make a film differently. They changed the way the entire studio worked. We gave the black sheep a chance to prove their theories, and we changed the way a number of things are done here. For less money per minute than was spent on the previous film, Finding Nemo, we did a movie that had 3 times the number of sets and had everything that was hard to do. All this because the heads at Pixar gave us leave to try crazy ideas. That project was The Incredibles. It grossed over $600 million and won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature. The same traits that make people a nightmare to deal with can also make them the people who change the world. Research shows that very creative people are more arrogant, dishonest, and disorganized. They also get lower grades in school. Despite what teachers may say, they dislike creative students because those children often don't do what they are told. Does this sound like a great employee to you? Hardly. So it's no surprise that creativity is inversely correlated with employee performance reviews. Creative people are less likely to be promoted to CEO. H.R. Giger, the man responsible for the eerily brilliant designs of the creature in the Alien film franchise, explained, in Chur, Switzerland, the word artist is a term of abuse, combining drunkard, whoremonger, layabout, and simpleton in one. But as any mathematician knows, averages can be deceptive. Andrew Robinson, CEO of famed advertising agency BBDO, once said, when your head is in a refrigerator and your feet on a burner, the average temperature is okay. I am always cautious about averages. As a general rule, anything better aligned to fit a unique scenario is going to be problematic on average. And qualities that are generally good can be bad at the extremes. The jacket that works just fine 8 months out of the year will be a terrible choice in the dead of winter. By the same token, with intensifiers, qualities that seem universally awful have their uses in specific contexts. They are the Formula One cars that are undrivable on city streets but break records on a track. It's a matter of basic statistics. When it comes to the extremes of performance, averages don't matter. What matters is variance, those deviations from the norm. Almost universally, we humans try to filter out the worst to increase the average, but by doing this we also decrease variance. Chopping off the left side of the bell curve improves the average, but there are always qualities that we think are in that left side that also are in the right. A great example of this is the often debated connection between creativity and mental illness. In his study, The Mad Genius Paradox, Dean Keith Simonton found that mildly creative people are mentally healthier than average, but extremely creative people have a far higher incidence of mental disorders. Much like with leadership filtration theory, reaching the heights of success requires a dip into qualities that are otherwise problematic. This is regularly seen across a wide variety of disorders and talents. Studies show people with attention deficit disorder, ADD, are more creative. Psychologist Paul Pearson found a connection between humor, neuroticism, and psychopathy. Impulsivity is a generally negative trait frequently mentioned in the same sentence as violent and criminal, but it also has a clear link to creativity. Would you hire a psychopath? No. And the research shows that psychopaths don't do well on average. Most people would just stop there, but a study titled Personality Characteristics of Successful Artists showed that top performers in creative fields demonstrate markedly higher scores on measures of psychoticism than lesser artists. Another study from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology showed that successful US presidents also demonstrate higher scores on psychopathic characteristics. Often intensifiers masquerade as positives because we give successful people the benefit of the doubt. It's the old joke that poor people are crazy and rich people are eccentric. Traits like obsessiveness are framed as positives for those already in the successful camp and negatives for others. We all know some who benefit from perfectionism and others who are just crazy. Malcolm Gladwell popularized K. Anders Ericsson's research showing that it takes approximately 10,000 hours of effort to become an expert at something. There is a natural reaction to so big a number. Why in the world would anyone do that? With the idea framed by the term expertise, we are quick to associate positive notions, like dedication and passion, but there's little doubt that spending so much time and hard work on anything non-essential has an element of obsession to it. While the valedictorian treats school as a job, working hard to get A's and follow the rules, the obsessed creative succeeds by bearing down on his or her passion projects with a religious zeal. In his memorably titled study, The Mundanity of Excellence, Daniel Chambliss examined the extreme dedication and unvarying, monotonous routines of top-level swimmers. Considering they put themselves through this day after day for years on end, the idea of dedication rings hollow. But the word obsession makes you nod your head. You may think intensifiers are only relevant to areas of individual artistry and expertise, like sports, or that they just aren't relevant in the regular world. You'd be wrong. Consider some of the richest people in the world. Do you see conscientious rule followers, free from negative outlier traits? No. 58 members of the Forbes 400 either avoided college or ditched it partway through. These 58, almost 15% of the total, have an average net worth of $4.8 billion. This is 167% greater than the average net worth of the 400, which is $1.8 billion. It's more than twice the average net worth of those 400 members who attended Ivy League colleges. The hard-charging Silicon Valley entrepreneur has become a respected, admired icon in the modern age. Do these descriptors match the stereotype? A ball of energy. Little need for sleep. A risk-taker. Doesn't suffer fools gladly. Confident and charismatic, bordering on hubristic. Boundlessly ambitious. Driven and restless. Absolutely. They are also the traits associated with a clinical condition called hypomania. Johns Hopkins psychologist John Gartner has done work showing that's not a coincidence. Full-blown mania renders people unable to function in normal society. But hypomania produces a relentless, euphoric, impulsive machine that explodes toward its goals while staying connected, even if only loosely, with reality. With intensifiers, you have to take the good with the bad. In their paper, The Economic Value of Breaking Bad, Misbehavior, Schooling, and the Labor Market, the authors showed that efforts to reduce aggressiveness and misbehavior in young boys did improve their grades but also reduce their lifetime earnings. Boys who acted out ended up working more hours, being more productive, and earning 3% more than boys who didn't. It parallels the venture capital industry. Noted venture capitalist Mark Andreessen spoke at Stanford, saying, "The venture capital business is 100% a game of outliers. It is extreme outliers. We have this concept, invest in strength versus lack of weakness. And at first that is obvious, but it's actually fairly subtle. Which is sort of the default way to do venture capital, is to check boxes. So really good founder, really good idea, really good products, really good initial customers. Check, 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 check. Okay, this is reasonable, I'll put money in it." What you find with those sort of checkbox deals, and they get done all the time, but what you find is that they often don't have something that really makes them really remarkable and special. They don't have an extreme strength that makes them an outlier. On the other side of that, the companies that have the really extreme strengths often have serious flaws. So one of the cautionary lessons of venture capital is, if you don't invest on the basis of serious flaws, you don't invest in most of the big winners. And we can go through example after example after example of that. But that would have ruled out almost all the big winners over time. So what we aspire to do is to invest in the startups that have a really extreme strength. Along an important dimension, that we would be willing to tolerate certain weaknesses. In some cases the greatest tragedies produce the greatest intensifiers. What do the following people all have in common? Abraham Lincoln, Gandhi, Michelangelo, Mark Twain. They all lost a parent before age 16. The list of orphans who became spectacular successes, or at least notoriously influential, is much longer and includes no fewer than 15 British prime ministers. There's no doubt that for many losing a parent at a young age is devastating, with profound negative effects. But for some, as Dan Cole points out in the Talent Code, researchers theorize that such a tragedy instills in a child the feeling that the world is not safe and that an immense amount of energy and effort will be needed to survive. Due to their unique personality and circumstances, these orphans overcompensate and turn tragedy into fuel for greatness. So under the right circumstances, there can be big upsides to negative qualities. Your bad traits might be intensifiers. But how can you turn them into superpowers? Asterisk. In 1984, Neil Young was sued for not being himself. Music mogul David Geffen had signed the rock and roll legend to a major contract but didn't like Young's first album for the label. The lawsuit would say it was unrepresentative. Plain and simple, Geffen had wanted Neil Young to be who he'd always been, do what he'd always done, and, quite frankly, sell lots of albums doing it. In Geffen's mind, the album trend was too country. Neil Young hadn't made a Neil Young album. On the surface, that might be true. But underneath it was dead wrong. Neil Young had always been an innovator. That's who he really was. As an artist, he'd always tried different things. He wasn't making a quality-controlled, consistent product like Coca-Cola. His sound had evolved and would continue to. Neil Young was being himself. After talking with Gautam Mukunda about leadership filtration theory, I asked the obvious question we'd all want to know the answer to: how do I use it to be more successful in life? He said there are 2 steps. First, know thyself. This phrase has been uttered many times throughout history. It's carved into stone at the oracle at Delphi. The Gospel of Thomas says, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. If you're good at playing by the rules, if you're related to those valedictorians, if you're a filtered leader, then double down on that. Make sure you have a path that works for you. People high in conscientiousness do great in school and in many areas of life where there are clear answers and a clear path. But when there aren't, life is really hard for them. Research shows that when they are unemployed, their happiness drops 120% more than those who aren't as conscientious. Without a path to follow, they are lost. If you're more of an outsider, an artist, an unfiltered leader, you'll be climbing uphill if you try to succeed by complying with a rigid, formal structure. By dampening your intensifiers, you'll be not only at odds with who you are but also denying your key advantages. While improving yourself is noble and necessary, research shows that many of the more fundamental aspects of personality don't change. Traits like verbal fluency, adaptability, impulsivity, and humility are stable from childhood through adulthood. In Management Challenges for the 21st Century, Peter Drucker, probably the most influential thinker on the subject of management, says that to be successful throughout your entire work life, which will likely span numerous jobs, multiple industries, and wholly different careers, it all comes down to exactly what Mukunda said: knowing yourself. And knowing yourself, in terms of achieving what you want in life, means being aware of your strengths. Consider the people we're all envious of who can confidently pick something, say they're going to be awesome at it, and then calmly go and actually be awesome at it. This is their secret. They're not good at everything, but they know their strengths and choose things that are a good fit. Regarding knowing your strengths, Drucker says, this enables people to say to an opportunity, to an offer, to an assignment, yes, I'll do that. But this is the way I should be doing it. This is the way it should be structured. This is the way my relationships should be. These are the kind of results you should expect from me, and in this time frame, because this is who I am. Many people struggle with this. They aren't sure what their strengths are. Drucker offers a helpful definition: what are you good at that consistently produces desired results? To find out what those things are, he recommends a system he calls feedback analysis. Quite simply, when you undertake a project, write down what you expect to happen, then later note the result. Over time you'll see what you do well and what you don't. By figuring out whether you fall into the filtered or unfiltered camp, and by knowing where your strengths are, you're miles ahead of the average person in terms of achieving both success and happiness. Modern positive psychology research has shown again and again that one of the keys to happiness is emphasizing what are called signature strengths. Research by Gallup shows that the more hours per day you spend doing what you're good at, the less stressed you feel and the more you laugh, smile, and feel you're being treated with respect. Once you know what type of person you are and your signature strengths, how do you thrive? This leads to Mukunda's second piece of advice: pick the right pond. You've got to pick the environments that work for you. Context is so important. The unfiltered leader who is an amazing success in one situation will be a catastrophic failure in the other, in almost all cases. It's way too easy to think, I've always succeeded, I am a success, I am successful because I am a success, because it's about me, and therefore I will succeed in this new environment. Wrong. You were successful because you happened to be in an environment where your biases and predispositions and talents and abilities all happen to align neatly with those things that would produce success in that environment. Ask yourself, which companies, institutions, and situations value what I do? Context affects everyone. In fact, the conscientious valedictorians so good at following rules often stumble the most here. Without an existing passion and being so eager to please, they often head in the wrong direction when they are finally free to choose. Speaking about the valedictorians she studied, Karen Arnold said, people feel like valedictorians can take care of themselves, but just because they could get A's doesn't mean they can translate academic achievement into career achievement. Whether you're a filtered doctor or a wild, unfiltered artist, research shows the pond you pick matters enormously. When Harvard Business School professor Boris Groysberg looked at top Wall Street analysts who jumped ship to work for a competitor, he noticed something interesting: they stopped being top analysts. Why? We tend to think experts are experts just because of their unique skills, and we forget the power of context, of knowing one's way around, of the teams who support them, and the shorthand they develop together over time. That's one of the things Groysberg discovered. When the analysts switched firms but brought their team with them, they stayed awesome. When you choose your pond wisely, you can best leverage your type, your signature strengths, and your context to create tremendous value. This is what makes for a great career, but such self-knowledge can create value wherever you choose to apply it. This was well illustrated by how Toyota helped a charity. The food bank for New York City relies on corporate donations to function. Toyota had donated money until 2011 when they came up with a far better idea. Toyota's engineers had dedicated countless hours to fine-tuning processes and realized that while any company could donate cash, they had something unique to offer: their expertise. So they decided to donate efficiency. Journalist Mona El Naga described the results. At a soup kitchen in Harlem, Toyota's engineers cut down the wait time for dinner to 18 minutes from as long as 90. At a food pantry on Staten Island, they reduced the time people spent filling their bags to 6 minutes from 11. And at a warehouse in Bushwick, Brooklyn, where volunteers were packing boxes of supplies for victims of Hurricane Sandy, a dose of Kaizen cut the time it took to pack one box to 11 seconds from 3 minutes. You can do this too. Know thyself and pick the right pond. Identify your strengths and pick the right place to apply them. If you follow rules well, find an organization aligned with your signature strengths and go full steam ahead. Society clearly rewards those who can comply, and these people keep the world an orderly place. If you're more of an unfiltered type, be ready to blaze your own path. It's risky, but that's what you were built for. Leverage the intensifiers that make you unique. You're more likely to reach the heights of success and happiness if you embrace your flaws. It's like the Turing test. For years, computer scientists have put people in front of computers and had them converse via typing with someone. After a period of time, the people are asked, were you communicating with a human or a piece of software? The program that falls the most judges wins the Lugner Prize. But there's also another prize given out at the competition. It goes to the human that is most convincingly human. When the judges look at what the people typed, which person is least likely to be mistaken for a clever computer? In 1994, the winner was Charles Platt. Did he come across as so human because his responses were more emotionally realistic or his use of English more rich and nuanced? Hell, no. He did it by being moody, irritable, and obnoxious. Maybe that's because our flaws are what make us most human. Charles Platt found success through human flaws. And sometimes we can too. You've now got a better idea of who you are and where you belong. But life isn't all about you. You have to deal with others. And what's the best way to do that? Do nice guys finish last? Or do you need to cut corners and maybe a few throats to get ahead? Let's look at that next.